Running. So what we're going to be doing today is the writing the results section in class activity that we're going to do. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to work on this draft of part one of the results section. So I have the kind of skeletal outline, some kind of boiler plate terminology to help us write it all up. But that's what we're going to be doing. And in service to that, we are going to need to use the handout that that you just received. So the first part of the handout has the information that we are going to use in class today. That is the percent of items recalled. So if you remember, in the experiment, we measured two behaviors. We had two things that we got scores about from the subjects, from all of you. Number one, we got how many words did you recall? That's the percent recall. Number two, we also asked how confident were you about the words. That's on the second page there. That's that confidence level. So what we're going to do in class today is we're going to write up the percent recall section of the results section. And then as a homework assignment, you're going to take that, copy and paste it to form a complete results section that has part one, percent recall in it, and then part two, confidence level. And the reason that we can do that is because, as you're going to see, results sections are very structured. They're very, have a standard sort of way of presenting information. And that's what we're going to take advantage of. So the last thing we need to know is how to read this table here. So what this first part here does is it gives you the actual numbers for the scores obtained in every single condition of our experiment. And then on the next page, you can see the graphs that kind of help to illustrate the scores that we obtained on every single part of the experiment. So if you look at this first graph here, where we have percent recall, and then there's item type. So if you look at that top graph, it's got percent recall and item type. You will see on the graph that the correct items were recalled just under 80%. So about 80% of the correct items were recalled in our experiment. And that actual number is here, it's 76.9%. So in our experiment, correct words were recalled at a rate of 76.9%. You can see for critical on that graph, there's a lower bar. A lower percentage of critical items were recalled. A lower percentage of those false items were recalled. And the actual number there is 40%. So out of these 6 false words, out of the 6 false memories that were possible, we recalled 40% of those, so just under half, right? So about 2 and a little bit. So that's where the numbers are for these particular graphs. And we're going to be using this information and reporting this information, so we needed to have the actual numbers ready to go. So you have it in graph form to kind of help you follow along. We have it here in number form to help us write it. And what the way to read this is that it'll tell you either a particular condition had a score or a combination of conditions had a score. So for example, singles, individuals that were completing this experiment alone, they recalled 57% of the items. Pairs, people working together in groups of 2, recalled about 58.9%. Groups of 3 recalled about 59.4%. So those are the actual numbers for singles, pairs, and groups of 3. For correct items, we just discussed this. Correct items were recalled at 76.9%. Critical items, or the false memories, were recalled at 40%. And then the last part of this indicates the combination of those two conditions. So singles recalled correct items at a rate of 69.8%. Singles recalled critical items, false items, at a rate of 44.3%. Pairs recalled correct items at a rate of 77.7%. Pairs recalled critical items at a rate of 40.1%. And then finally, groups of 3 recalled correct items at a rate of 83.1%. Groups of 3 recalled critical items at a rate of 35.7%. So those are the numbers that we're going to report in this results section. And then the final information that you need these handouts for is the inferential statistics. So this information here is the inferential statistics, and we're going to spend time in the upcoming lectures to get really clear on what main effects are and what interactions are. But for this purpose, writing it up here, a main effect is the effect of a variable by itself. So just looking at the type, item type, just looking at group size. And then the interaction are how those two variables affect each other. How does group size affect correct item recall? How does group size affect false item recall? The way that you read this is it first is going to ask you, is there an effect for a particular variable? So when this says main effect of item type, yes, that indicates that there was a difference between the recall for the two types of items. There was a difference between the recall for correct and critical items. And then this is the statistics that backs it up. You'll learn about that in P354 if you haven't already. You don't need to know what this means to write up the results section, but we do need to report it. Right? This is the evidence that we give to make this claim. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to explain to the reader what is the difference. And this is what's indicated here, was that correct items had a higher percent recall than critical items. So down here, for the next one, for group type, there it is. Yeah, thank you. Down here for the main effect of group type, stats says no, there is no effective group type. Percent recall did not change as we went from singles to pairs to groups of 3. Here's the stats that backs up that claim. And we're going to explain to the reader that singles had the same percent recall as pairs, and pairs had the same percent recall as groups of 3. And then finally, for the group type times item type interaction, did group size interact with the type of item to change the effects? The answer there is yes. There's the stats to back it up. And basically what this means is that if there's an interaction, there's a different story for correct items compared to critical items. There's a different story for real memories compared to false memories. So the percent recall for correct items, singles recalled fewer items than pairs did, and pairs recalled fewer correct items than groups of 3. So this effect here, recall increased as group size increased. However, the story is different for the percent recall for critical items. For false memories, singles recalled just as many false memories as pairs, and pairs recalled just as many false memories as groups of 3. So this whole page here is basically a summary of our results section. This whole page here is basically the information that we need as evidence to help the reader understand the results section. So refer to this as we go through and write up the results section. This is what we are going to be presenting. All right, any questions so far on the handout and what we need to do and accomplish? All right, a few more things that I'll mention. Number one, this is your the template that we're going to be using. Basically, anything right now that is in italics, we need to change. So results is a level 1 heading. We'll fix that if we have time when we get to the APA format portion. If not, then you'll need to address that when you're finalizing this draft. Percent recall is what we're writing up right now. That's a level 2 heading. Dependent measure is a level 3 heading. So we are going to first define what the dependent measures are by providing both a conceptual definition of what type of memory are we measuring with percent recall, and an operational definition. How did we actually calculate percent recall? After that, we're going to report the mixed analysis of variance. I have some boilerplate statistics pros here. This was handed down to me from my supervisor, and it was handed down to him from his supervisor. I exaggerate, but basically, this is what every single results section for this type of an experiment looks like. And there's no point in reinventing the wheel. I literally copy and paste this template every single time I write up a research report. And that's just to make sure that that repetition, that Goldilocks and the three bears type stuff takes into effect. So we'll put in the describe what happened in lay terms, and then we will go through each of those effects that we just talked about. We'll talk about the main effect of item type. Was there a difference between correct and critical items? Yes, there was. We'll talk about the main effect of group type. Was there a difference in group size? No, there wasn't. We'll explain that. And then we'll talk about the item type times group size interaction. Was there an interaction? Yes, there was. And we'll describe what happened. And we'll be done with the draft of our results section. So that's the goal for today. What we're going to be doing and the way that we're going to be doing this is I will ask you to call out things that we will write down, fill in here. Once we are done with the draft or when the class expires, whichever occurs first, I will save this. I will upload this to Canvas as soon as this class is done. You will then finalize the percent recall draft, copy it, paste it underneath, and then change whatever you need to do the confidence level draft, and then that whole thing gets handed in as your results section. All right, so let's get started on the first section of information that we need. We're going to need a conceptual definition of percent recall. I found that that's oftentimes the most challenging thing. So we're going to save that, we're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to start with our operational definition of percent recall. And what we mean by this is, how is it that we calculated percent recall? How is it that we ended up with 76.9% for correct items? How is it that we ended up with 40% for critical items? You'll recall that in total, we had 90 correct items in our experiment. We had 6 critical items in our experiment. So we need operational definitions for percent recall. So anyone that wants to shout something out? We can start off with, for correct items, percent recall was calculated by sorry, what was that? The amount of correct items. Oh, we'll go back and we'll fix it, but let's get something down. So the amount of correct items. Yep. Oh, okay. Oh, you're saying users. Okay. So we had percent recall was calculated by the amount of correct items recalled out of the total number of items. Anything else we need to add to that? Or does that seem true? Yes, it's exactly what it is. It's true, not pretty. Okay? So this is literally what we did. We calculated percent recall by taking the amount of correct items that were recalled and then figuring out what's the percentage out of the total number of items. So we're going to leave this as is right now because it's true, it's correct. If it was incorrect, I would say, no, we got to fix this. But this is true, it's correct. We're going to circle back and we're going to make it pretty later on. We're going to make it more understandable later on. But for right now, we have ourselves for the operational definition for correct items. Now, for critical items, let's do the same thing. Percent recall was calculated by, and what do we do for critical? Whoops. No, we'll just, let's just get it down with the amount of false words recalled.
Oh, wait, no, you said recalled.
That's fine.
Okay.
Let's keep it going. So percent recall was calculated by the amount of false items or false words recalled. We did something else to it though. Whoops. Out of the total number, not of false items. Yes, okay. False items. Okay, so one last thing that I'm going to add here, just so that we can have this information. In case we forgot, there was 90 items. There was 90 correct items. And there were 6 false items. All right, so this right now, as it stands, not very well written, right? It needs to be fixed, but it's true. It's not false. It's not very understandable, but it's correct. So we're going to come back to that if we have time, and we're going to make it sound better. But for right now, we got something done. We're writing drunk. We're going to edit sober. So let's move on to the next section. So for the next section here, it's the mixed analysis of variance, which is the ANOVA. And then this, again, this is just boilerplate language. For this and all subsequent analyses, an alpha level of 0.05 was used. 2 independent variables were tested: item type, correct versus critical, and group size, single versus pair versus triple. They were tested in a 2 item type times 3 group size mixed ANOVA. So that is standard boilerplate results section jargon. If you don't know what that means, again, you'll find out in P354. What we're going to do right now, though, is 2 things. Number one, we have some names that we have introduced for certain things in our experiment. All right, so notice that the types of words that we are analyzing are either the correct words, the words that were presented, or they're the critical words, the words that were the false memories, the words that were not presented. We have group size, and we're going to call them singles, pairs, and triples. And then we have names for our variables. We got item type. Was it correct or was it critical? We have group size. Was it single, pair, or triple? And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to use these names throughout our entire results section. So we will go back and fix that operational definition to include these terms to make it more consistent. But for right now, we need to, in very general terms, in layman's language, in non-technical jargon, we need to describe what happened in our experiment. Question?
Yeah. So you keep the level 3 heading thing there, like that part of the template, or do you eventually?
No, you'll eventually get rid of the level 3 heading. That's just to alert you that that is a level 3 heading.
Okay.
Yep.
So you ignored the other ones? So
Yep. No, that is a good question. Okay, so in general now, we have to describe what happened. What the easiest thing to do, or the most straightforward thing to do in a results section, is if you have an interaction, which we do, describe the interaction. So as simply as we can, we want to say, in general, for correct items, what happened? What happened for the correct items? You can see it on the bottom graph where we have, let me bring that up. Yes, so what we're doing here is imagine that a friend of yours, university student, well-educated, maybe not an expert in psychology, came up to you and said, oh, I'm looking at this graph here, Can you tell me what happened for the correct items? What happened for these blue bars here? Describe what is the effect of group size on this thing you call percent recall. What would you tell them?
As the group size increases, the more there's more correct words recalled.
What was that last part?
There were more correct words recalled.
All right. So in general, for correct items, as group size increases, there are more correct words recalled. That's true. And if you take a look at the inferential stats here, that's exactly what we have down here, right? As group size increased, percent recall also increased. So that's a very nice general explanation of what happened. So notice there's no statistical jargon, there's no F statistics or numbers in there at all. Just in general, for correct items, as group size increases, there were more correct words recalled. We have to finish the analysis. I'm going to put in however, because that's a nice signaling to the reader that something different is going to be told. For critical items, we're going to start using the same terms that we had. For critical items, what happened? What was that? Okay. The group size did not have a big enough difference among, whoops. Okay, so the group size did not have a big enough difference among them to have an effect. That is true. So we'll see here that group size did not have an effect. There was no difference between percent recall for group size. So we are going to, once again, leave that now, because while this is, again, not well written, this would actually be, I feel, quite confusing to somebody who is reading this for the first time. It's true, we have it down, we can fix it later, we can make it better later. So all of this that I mentioned comes from a strategy for writing, which is to get something down first so you can work with it. Regardless of how good or horrible it might be, just get something down. And then once you have something down, you can come back and you can work with it. The worst thing you want to do when you're writing is, we could stay here for the next 20 minutes and try to workshop this sentence and say, no, I don't like that. Let's get rid of it. Let's write something else. No, that's horrible. Let's get rid of it. Let's write something else. No, that's horrible. Let's get rid of it. Let's write something else. And I'm sure most of you have had that experience where you've tried to write something, and 10, 15 minutes later, you're still sitting there at a blank page because everything was horrible when you began it. Well, let's make sure that we're actually progressing. Get something down. As long as it's true, it's fine. And then we'll come back and we'll make it sound pretty. All right. So now we're going to start in with the descriptions of the effects. Now we're going to start in with really using that sort of Goldilocks and the Three Bears structure, where we're going to do the same thing over and over and over again. So what we're going to do for each variable and for the interaction, we're going to say whether there was or was no evidence of a main effect. We're going to report the stats, and then we're going to describe what happened. Then we're going to say there was or was no evidence of a main effect. We're going to report the stats. We're going to tell them what happened. Then we're going to say there was or was no evidence of a interaction. We're going to report the stats. We're going to tell them what happened. Is Goldilocks sitting in the hard chair, the soft chair, and the chair that's just right? We're going to be doing that the exact same way. So let's start off with the first main effect of item type. So once again, refer to your statistics handout here, and let me know, was there a main effect of item type? There was. So what we say is there was evidence of, that's pretty standard language, there was evidence of a main effect of item type. Next thing we need to do, as soon as you make that claim that there was a main effect of item type, you need to give it statistics. You need to basically say, there was a main effect of item type. Oh, and by the way, here are some numbers to back up my claim. So what I need from everybody here is just a double check. Are those the right numbers? Did I get anything wrong? They're good? Okay. So make sure you double check your numbers. They will change for the second part of this study. So make sure that you have those correct. All right, and now the last thing. So we just said that there's an effect. We just gave them the statistical evidence. Now we have to describe what happened. We have to give them this information in an English language sentence. So,
there were more correct items recalled than critical items.
Higher percentage.
for all groups, there was a, let's go with higher percentage of correct items recalled than critical items. I think that's mostly what we had there. Okay, so for all groups, there was a higher percentage of correct items recalled than critical items. What we're going to do here right now is whenever in this section here, when you're doing the general description, remember previously we gave them a general description, we gave them a general outlook so that the reader's mind could be ready for what's coming next. Because we've done that and their minds are prepared, we can give them numbers here just to indicate what those actual percentages were. So what I would like right now is, what was that percentage of correct items that was recalled? What was the average that was recalled? 76.9%. And then the critical items, it was 40%. All right, and then that's just really friendly for the reader, just so that they actually have the actual numbers. And then the other thing is that you'll notice see figure 1 over here inserted. Figure 1, you don't have to hand in figure 1 for your first draft, but figure 1, just so that you're aware of it, is going to be the figure of the interaction. It's that bottom figure. That's going to be figure number 1, because that is, for our reader, the picture that explains what it is that we're telling the reader. So when we say things like, oh, correct items were higher than critical, the reader can take a look at this picture and say, you know what, I don't really understand. What do you guys mean? This English reading is kind of difficult for me. And they can take a look at this and say, oh, in every single case, correct items were recalled. They have a higher bar than critical items. Oh, I get what you're talking about. So the same way that you would draw a picture of Goldilocks eating porridge, when you say Goldilocks sat down and ate a bowl of porridge, you send your reader to a figure, if you can, in order to help them understand it. Now, we're sending them to a figure of the interaction for 2 reasons. Number 1, the interaction has all the information that you have in your experiment, all in one concise figure. So you don't need to have the other figures there. They're more for you to understand. It's a little bit redundant in an actual results section to have the other figures. I would love that redundancy. However, in most journals, they're limited on space, and they will not allow you to publish massive amounts of figures. Usually you get maybe like 1 per results section. So that's why we're going to stick to just 1 figure for the interaction. Yep? That's for mean. Yep.
Just double check.
No, absolutely. That is something that, once again, P354. And also, I mean, this is one of the things that we can do here because the results section is so structured. You don't need to know what this means. You don't really need to know what the M means. It's a good question, but you don't really need to know in order to write it with this style. So you can write this and say, you know what, I don't know what M means, but I know that that's what comes before the actual scores. And later on, you could learn what you were doing and be like, oh, that was the mean all along. What did I, I guess I knew. All right, so let me save this as our draft. So we don't lose anything. Okay, so we're done with the main effect of item type. Now we're moving on to the main effect of group size. So first thing off, was there a main effect or was there no main effect for group size? There was no main effect. So we see on our synopsis here that for the main effect of group type, no, there was not. What that means is that any differences that we see in group type does not indicate a real difference. It indicates a chance difference, right? So these groups are actually equal on their percent recall. So there was no evidence of a main effect of group size. There's the stats. Do the numbers look right? Just need to double check. Numbers are good? All right. Post hoc Bonferroni comparisons. That's just a fancy way of saying a technique that you use to make multiple comparisons. Again, you'll learn about that in stats. Revealed what? What happened for group size? Okay, so revealed nothing, but we do need a little bit more. So describe the nothing. We'll leave nothing in for right now because it's true. But what do we mean? We need to make it very explicit for the reader. There was no drastic difference among group types? Yeah. Emong. Okay. So I spell it in a drastic way so they'll never forget. Okay. So there's one last thing that I'm going to make a change here before we move on. This is pretty much true. The one thing, though, that I'm glad you mentioned that, you want to make this as straightforward and simple for your reader as you possibly can. So two things that we did here. Number one, there's no evidence of a main effect of group size. What that means is that the groups, the conditions, the group sizes were not different. Bless you. They were, again, there was no evidence that they were any different.
All right, take out drastic.
So the reader should be able to infer from that the group sizes, their scores were all the same, right? They should be able to infer from that, but we don't want to leave it up to them. We don't want to basically say, oh, you figure out on your own. We want to make it explicit. So we will tell them the Bonferroni comparisons revealed nothing. There was no drastic differences among group types. We tell them there was no differences so that they don't have to waste their mental capacity trying to hold on to all this information and figure out what this means. The other thing, though, is that this drastic difference,
Just take it out.
take it out because we report the inferential statistics. We do not report the actual measured statistics. So whereas the measured statistics, whereas if you take a look at the actual numbers for singles, pairs, and groups of three here, you're right, there's no drastic difference between those numbers. Those numbers are pretty close. But the inferential statistics tells us that these numbers are the same. They're essentially the same. So when we're reporting that there's no evidence, we also want to report there is no difference. So even though there clearly is a difference, right? I mean, just go back to grade school. 57% is not the same as 58.9. Statistics has told us there is no difference. So we don't want to use language that might potentially confuse a reader and say things like, well, there was no drastic difference, We just want to come out straightforward and say no difference among these group types.
So when you say like no difference, like even if you put like discernible in there, that's a no-no?
Yes, that's a no-no.
Okay.
Yep.
People we're talking to are stupid. We gotta talk to them like
Well, these people that we're talking to, they're reading very complicated material, and the last thing they need is to have more stuff thrown at them in order to kind of throw them off the case. So it's literally, that's why I like the analogy of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's like a little child trying to understand all this complicated narrative structure. The last thing you want to do is start using different words and different story structures. You want to keep it as simple as we possibly can. So the last thing that I'm going to add here is when you are reporting these, the no differences, you do want to report pairs. You do want to report the individual scores as well. So I will put that in here, and if somebody can just let me know what was the mean items recalled for the singles. All right, and for pairs. And lastly, for triples. All right. So we got that down, and now the last piece that we need to get is the interaction. And once again, we're going to write this up the exact same way as everything that was written before. So there was or was no evidence of the interaction. Here's the stats. Here's the description. So was there or was there no evidence of an interaction? There was. So we'll get rid of this was no. And just a number check on the stats. Does that look correct? All right. So, what was that?
It's 86, not 78.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you. Nicely done. All right, and then we need to describe what happened. And once again, for an interaction, the best way to describe it is to choose one level of a variable and describe what happened for that, and then do the next level and describe what happened for that. So we can do that with the item types. So for correct items, what happened for correct items?
Groups of three, we call more correct items in pairs. We call more correct items in singles.
All right, so groups of three were called more correct items. So groups of three were called more correct items. Put the mean in right there. What was the mean correct items were called by groups of three?
83.1.
All right, then pairs. What was the mean for pairs?
77.7.
Which were called more correct items than singles. What was the mean for singles?
69.8.
All right, so we have four correct items. Groups of three were called more correct items, 83.1%. Then pairs, 77.7%, which were called more correct items. And then singles, 69.28%. So we're going to want to do this for critical items as well. So we are going to take advantage of that parallel structure and basically copy and paste it and change what we need to change. So we just finished doing correct items. So now we can do critical. For critical items, groups of three were called
The same number of
and we'll have to change this to as pairs. And then what do we do for the rest of it?
which is also the same as singles.
All right, and what were those numbers? So critical items, how many did pairs, groups of 3 recall?
35.7.
And what do we have for pairs, critical items?
40.1.
And then finally, singles.
24.1.
All right, and then we'll send them to see figure 1 because that's where we'll have that information. Okay, so we are almost done with our first pass through this results section. The last thing we now need is we need a conceptual definition of percent recall. And as I mentioned, this is perhaps the most challenging. It's partly because it's the least well-defined one here, the one that has the least straightforward correct answer. But for this conceptual definition, what we want to describe to the reader is what aspect of memory are we measuring with percent recall? So what is percent recall trying to measure about memory? Because we have 2 different measures of memory in this one results section. We got percent recall that is measuring something about memory. And then we got confidence level, which is measuring something else about memory. We want to be explicit to the reader what each of those is measuring. So we can write something like percent recall measured. What did it measure? What was that? So we did measure real memories and false memories, but we also measured real memories and false memories for confidence, because we had confidence ratings for real memories and false memories. But what's the sort of characteristic of memory that we were measuring? So confidence measures stuff like how sure you are that your memory is real. If we did reaction time, we would measure how fast could you bring the memory, into your mind. So what is it? What aspect of memory was percent recall trying to get at? Which facet of memory was it that we were looking at? Accuracy. So we can go percent recall measured accuracy. All right. Got to add a little bit more. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. Like I said, I skipped this one because this is oftentimes what happens here. So what I'm going to do is we'll leave this as part of the homework assignment, but you need to expand on this. So it is true that we are measuring the accuracy of memory. That is basically what we're looking at with percent recall. So try to expand on that. What is it that we were looking for with percent recall? I'll give you a hint. It was the ability to bring back information into your mind, right? So not how confident you were, not how sure you were, but just how much stuff could you bring back into your memory. That's what we were looking at. So part of that has to do with accuracy. Part of it has to do with how much stuff. We'll leave that as an exercise for you to complete, because otherwise I think we spend the next half hour just working on that one sentence. Okay, we have our operational definitions. So for correct items and for critical items, notice we use correct and critical. We want to make sure that we're very consistent now. So for correct items, percent recall was calculated by the amount of correct items recalled out of the total number of items, 90 correct items. So that's true, doesn't sound good. So what can we do to make it sound better? So we'll leave that there so we don't erase it and want it back. Any ideas? I mean, it's basically there. It's just, so calculated by the amount of correct items recalled out of the total number of items, 90 correct items. So let's look at it this way. Let's say that you had a research assistant, and your research assistant came in and they said, you know what, I want to help you do some stats. I want to help you crunch some numbers. I see that you have all these total amounts of items recalled from this experiment. What should I do with that? How do I calculate the percent recall that you want? So if you were to tell this individual, oh, okay, to calculate percent recall, take this and do this, and then whatever number you get as percent recall, what would be the sort of take this and do this? Because we have it here, but this is going to be, if you tell somebody, oh, I want you to calculate the amount of correct items recalled out of the total number of items, 90 correct items, that could be confusing. How can we make it more explicit?
The amount of correct items participants recall, like, do you want to do the actual math behind it?
Yes, yes.
So divided by.
Yes, divided. Good. Okay, so divided is one of the key words there, right? We want to put that in. So what was your suggestion?
For correct item, percent recall is calculated.
Let's put in dividing. By dividing the
Amount of correct items participants recalled. By 90 total correct items, by the 90 total.
yes, by the 90 total correct items. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have now. So number one, it's still correct. It's still the exact same thing that we had there before. It's just that now it's a lot more explicit. Now it's a lot more clear. If you gave this instruction to somebody, they would be much more likely to say, oh, I get it, I know what you did. Which means that when a reader reads this, they're much more likely to say, oh, so that's how you got those numbers. Now I get it. Because remember, I probably should have mentioned this before, but by this time, they will have read your method section, right? This reader has already encountered your method section. So they already heard about the 6 lists. They already heard about the 15 words per list. They already know there's 90 words in total. They already know there's 6 critical items, one for each of the 6 lists. So they are familiar with that. So when we have now that percent recall was calculated by dividing the amount of correct items participants recalled by the 90 total correct items, that makes sense to them. And not only does it make sense, but it's very clear. They know that you have to take the one number and divide it by the next number. Yep.
Could you add presented from the list by the end to make it even more explicit?
So what would you want it to say then?
Well, you would add 90 total correct items presented. I don't know, because.
You could. It's a judgment call on that one though.
Well, it depends on how you define correct items, because they're just kind of in the number.
Yes. So it would depend. You know what? Maybe not correct items.
Could it be from the list?
And 90 total. I'll make a suggestion, and then we'll see if we like this one. The correct items, you're right, it could be misconstrued. We could say something like the presented items, because then they've just read the method section that said we presented all these lists, and now we're like, oh, and the 90 total presented items, we're seeing how many correctly were recalled. Okay. So let's read this once through. For correct items, percent recall was calculated by dividing the amount of correct items participants recalled by the 90 total presented items. Does that sound good? Any suggestions?
Do you say each participant? Because it kind of sounds like you're taking every participant's correct items, which would be way more than 90.
Oh, let's see what that sounds like. Dividing the amount of correct items each participant recalled
Each subject.
by the 90 presented items. I don't know. We can take a vote on that one. How many people prefer each participant? And how many prefer participants? All right, well, let's keep it each participant then. One thing that you'll encounter is oftentimes when you're writing like this, it's not clear which one will be better. That's usually an indication that they're probably both pretty good, in which case we really don't have to spend too much time saying, no, I want participants, no, I want each participant. I think it sounds good that way, so we had a small majority vote on that one, so we'll keep each participant. All right, so at this point, we've gone through a few iterations of this. Any final changes, or do people think that this sounds good? So how many think it sounds good? How many have changes they still want to make? All right, so sounds good, it's good. So let's move on to the critical items. Now, once again, we're going to take advantage of that Goldilocks and the Three Bears analogy, and we're going to make this as simple for the reader as possible. So we just workshopped this sentence here for the percent recall for correct items. Let's just take that and go for critical. Percent recall was calculated by dividing the amount of critical items each participant recalled by the so far so good until we got here. So what is it divided by? Yep. 6 critical items. All right, so we can get rid of this sentence here. And any suggestions on any changes that we might need here? Does that seem good? Okay, so this is a prime example of something that you would never do when you're writing an English essay, right? Because this would get you marked down all over the place for just being too boring, being too straightforward. That's exactly what you want in a results section. You want boring, you want straightforward, so it gets in. So do it. Once you have a nice sentence, if you're trying to do the same thing, do it again. And that's why when you're doing the second part of this, I highly recommend copying this whole thing and then work it and say for correct items, confidence level was calculated by, how was it calculated, right? We added up all the confidence and then we divided by the total number of words. Calculated by dividing the total amount of confidence each participant gave by the 90%ed item. So use this when you're writing your next section as much as you can. You will have to change some of the wording to make it true. But again, just the same way that we copied this sentence and just changed a few things and now it's a great sentence about critical items, do the same thing when you're writing up your confidence level. All right, so this we didn't write, so it's perfect. This we didn't write, so it's still great. Right about here is where we started writing. So we need an in general for correct items, however, for critical items. So in general for correct items, as group size increases, there were more correct words recalled. So first thing, I'll just do this. It should be increased because it happens in the past. So as the group size increased, there were more correct words recalled. This one is it's pretty close. Any suggestions on maybe what should change? Yep.
I don't know if this would be considered a positive correlation between group size and the amount of correct words recalled.
Okay, so that's true, but at this stage we want to, as much as we can, not put statistical jargon in there. And positive correlation is a statistical kind of term. So if there is one way to communicate that a little bit more effectively, so let's see if we can do that here. So we go as group size increased, and then we go more correct words recalled. Is there a way to kind of keep it more parallel?
As group size increased, so did the number of correct words recalled.
Okay. Okay, and then the last thing that we can do to make this a little bit more straightforward is we just defined percent recall for the reader, so it's fresh in their minds. So the last thing we want to do here is we can use that term because we've just told them, hey, this is what percent recall is. So we can, instead of the number of correct words recalled, we can say as group size increased, so did. And what can we write there? Okay. All right. So I wouldn't put correct words again because we have correct items right here at the beginning. So for correct items, as the group size increased, so did the percent recall. Any final suggestions for that? So people in favor of that is good enough? All right, cool. One thing also that helped me in my writing is to know that it'll never be perfect. It's kind of like dusting a room. You dust a room until it's good enough that if you have people over, they'll look and say, this place is pretty clean. What you don't do is you don't dust until every single speck of dust is gone because you'll be dusting forever. Okay, so in general, for correct items, as group size increased, so did the percent recall. However, for critical items, see if we can do that same thing again. So for critical items, as group size increased,
There was no change in the percent recall.
whoops, there was no change in percent recall. All right, that one is actually, I kind of like that one. I think it's pretty straightforward. And again, notice repetition. Use that structure. As group size increased, so did the percent recall. However, for the mama bear, as group size increased, there was no change in percent recall, right? Make it simple for the reader. They'll thank you for it. And again, this, in English W131, I'm sure you would lose points all over the place because, again, it's boring. But it is straightforward. And it is very nice when a reader encounters this. They'll know that somebody who knows how to write a results section has written this results section. Okay. So lastly, we're down to the main effects and then the interaction. So we have, there was evidence of a main effect of item type. There's the stats. For all groups, there was a higher percentage of correct items recalled than critical items. So the one thing that I would definitely say we need to change here was this higher percentage. So once again, we just finished talking about percent recall. They just finished reading about percent recall. They just finished reading a general description with percent recall. So let's keep using that phrase. So how can we rephrase this, but use the word percent recall?
For all groups, there was greater percent recall.
Yeah, it's better, but I think we can still work it a little bit. One way to also help a results section, and I'm kind of seeing this here, see if you can get rid of extra words, right? So rather than, for all groups, there was a greater percent recall, we could just cut out that there was a greater and say something like, for all groups, percent recall was what for correct items? Was what? Was greater. Percent recall was greater for correct items than, I'll just put in 4 here, than for critical items. So for all groups, percent recall was greater for correct items than for critical items. Sounds good to me? Suggestions? Or sound good? All right, so we'll keep it at that. All right, so there was no evidence of a main effect of group size. Post hoc Bonferroni comparisons revealed nothing. There was no difference among group types, singles, pairs, and triples. So once again, we need to change this. And what we want to do is we want to have it, again, we can use this same sort of structure here. So the Bonferroni comparisons revealed that percent recall was equal. And then instead of saying among group types, we do want to list the groups. So we can say revealed that percent recall was equal for singles, pairs, and triples. And that seems pretty good. So like I said, we were almost there. This is literally saying Bonferroni comparisons revealed nothing. But now it's nice, it's spelled out. And again, we've just taken what was here and again used that sort of, revealed that percent recall was now, instead of going greater, was equal. So again, remember that sort of figure it out and then you can just use that same structure over and over and over again. All right, and now we got one last one. So there was evidence of an item type time group size interaction. For correct items, let's do it one more time. Percent recall was greater for, all right, so we have here groups of 3 recalled more correct items. I took the same thing that we had up here, percent recall was greater, and I just put it down here. For correct items, percent recall was greater for, we're calling these triples, so let's use that consistently. Was greater for triples than for pairs, which were called more correct items than singles. All right, so we need a little bit more work here. We got to get that little part here. So percent recall was greater for triples than for pairs, and now we need to communicate that that was also the case for a single. So what can we write there? All right, so percent recall was greater for triples than for pairs, which were both greater than singles. Any suggestions for that? Or is that good? Yeah, seems pretty good to me. All right, and then for the last one, we have percent recall. You know what, let's just use this guy right here. So for this last one here, it goes groups of 3 recalled the same number of critical items as pairs, which was also, whoops, that should be, let's get that point, 1 there, which was also the same as singles. So that's the way that we wrote it when we were getting this information down. But notice, we just worked on a kind of parallel statement that says the exact same thing. So why don't we do this? Why don't we copy this one that we worked on, and we'll bring it down here, and we'll say for critical items, and we'll Goldilocks and the 3 bears this result section. For critical items, percent recall was equal for singles. I'm going to have to change that number because that's the wrong number. It was 44.3. Pairs Where did pairs go? 40.1. And triples. 35.7. Whoops. Go see figure 1. All right. And we'll save that. Okay, so that is the content for your results section. So I've saved this. This is all ready to go in terms of content, except for one thing, which will be left for everyone here, which is that percent recall. What did it measure? What aspect of memory were we looking at? So this is what you're going to want to do. I will upload this to Canvas literally as soon as I get to my office today. And what you're going to do is you're going to download this off of Canvas, and this is going to be your starting point to, number 1, finish this little part here. Number 2, anything here that, for example, has these level headings, you need to put those into APA style. So for example, results here is a level 1 heading. So that's got to be bold, and that's got to be centered, and I'll do that one for you. But percent recall here is being identified as a level 2 heading. Format it so it's a level 2 heading. Dependent measures, level 3 heading. Format it so that it's a level 3 heading. And then for the rest of this, level 3 heading over here, make sure that you update the headings. And then the biggest thing here is going to be the numbers, and it's going to be the statistics. So go through the appendix, the reference section of your textbook for how to deal with numbers. Go through for how to deal with statistics. So just to kind of tell you some of the rules, statistics get italics for their statistical terms. P-values, for example, no leading zeros on a p-value. That's also APA style. So go through and change those. Again, you don't need to know what a p-value is to know that there's a p. So I got to get rid of that 0 up there. So I'll save that right about there. And then, do that for your APA style. Go through the requirements in the previous lecture slides that I mentioned. And then what you're going to do, once you get everything here nice and the way that you like it, you're going to take this percent recall. You are going to copy the whole thing. At least this is what I would suggest. You're going to copy the whole thing. And then right underneath, you're going to paste what we just wrote for percent recall. And then as the final part of your homework, you're going to say confidence level. And then you're going to say confidence level measured for correct items. Confidence level was calculated by dividing the amount of correct items. No, it wasn't. By dividing the total ratings for confidence. Nope, not this one. Just showing you what to do. So change it though, because nothing is going to lose you points faster on this draft than if this is nothing but a copied version of what we just had. So change it as needed. These numbers are going to have to change. Evidence or no evidence of a main effective item type might have to change. So switch it up, but do use as much as you possibly can. So for example, if there was no difference amongst confidence intervals, just copy and paste this for correct items. Confidence confidence level was the same for this, this, and this. Feel free to copy as much as you can. It's not plagiarism because we wrote it, so we can do it in that way. So that's what's the homework assignment. Get the results section, download it, workshop the APA, get that last little section in there, and then once that's kind of done, copy and paste it, and using the information on this handout, also fill in the numbers and the details for the confidence level. Yep. And that is due by midnight tomorrow. Yep. So we got half of it done, another half in the next 36 hours. And you'll be good to go. Any final questions on writing up the results section? Tomorrow by midnight. Yep, both parts. So definitely hand in both parts. You will hand in this all with the APA style, and then copy and paste directly underneath it. So we are looking at, all told, you'll have about 2.5 pages of, you'll have about 2.5 pages of a results section when everything is all said and done.
Turn it in.
Turn it in. Yep, and we'll be doing this through Turn It In. And then you will peer review this results section for your fellow students. Any final questions? All right, we are good. So again, I will upload this and make it available and use it as much as possible to help you write your results section.